It's coming up to the first anniversary of Donald Trump 2.0. There's certainly much to talk about, and who better to catch up with what's happening across the pond in the United States than our man Martin Liptrot. This is a special edition of the Downtown Den Politics podcast. I'm Frank McKenna. Let's get into that conversation with Martin.
The return of the sausages.
All sorts of things that I would have wanted as a kid that I couldn't have, right? Mm-hmm. Famously, Sky TV.
How'd that happen? I guess I just forgot what was going on.
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats.
Yay, it worked.
So welcome to this special edition of the Downtown Den Politics podcast. And we'll be concentrating on all things the US because we're delighted to be joined by our friend from across the pond, our regular blogger, of course, all things America. That's Martin Liptrot. Martin, great to see you today.
Likewise, Frank. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, no problem. And we were just saying before we started recording, not much to talk about because, of course, President Trump tends to keep his head down and doesn't really like publicity. But now, on a serious note, plenty to get our teeth into. But just give me your, first off, general opinion and view of how the Trump administration is seen domestically, where you think he's struggling, where you think he's doing well.
As everybody knows, we're in a very polarized world here. So the answer to that question probably depends where you sit politically. Those who are in the MAGA troops believe he's doing a phenomenal job and support him to the hilt. And those who perhaps don't buy into that thinking are increasingly critical of what looks like an authoritarian stamp that he brings to governing the nation. Polls recently have suggested that people are reducing their enthusiasm, let's call it that, for President Trump. Recent poll ratings pushed him below 40, which is a significant step down from where he was on election day in 24. And on the economy, handling of the economy, they're suggesting that his positive ratings are even lower than that. People are not feeling better off. The cost of living crisis continues, and they're not particularly enamored with some of the consequences of tariffs or trade moves as they're seen. I don't think a direct line has been drawn yet between price hikes and tariffs, but it's in the background. People are increasingly conscious of it. Now, in politics writ normal, we would be meeting in the West Wing to be discussing these failings or shortcomings and what the president's going to do about it. But I don't think those meetings take place with this administration. I'm not particularly sure that Trump cares what the polls do or don't say. I think his metric is probably where are his campaign donors and where are his headlines. So the Middle East has occupied his mind for the last week, so that's been the one that he's on. He's now looking at whether he goes to Budapest or not to meet Vladimir Putin. And all these are very serious issues and very important events. And I think that's where his mind is going to be. That and demolishing the East Wing to build a ballroom. So that was a shocker to wake up on Monday morning and see that half the White House had been demolished. I was chatting with a pal earlier and I said, imagine if Keir Starmer had put patio doors in at the back of number 10 Downing Street. So he'd be getting lynched for it. But yeah, so we live in different times over here. But I don't think Trump and those around him are bothered by polls. I don't think it factors to them. The money is still flowing in. This ballroom is being built with political donation. I think he's probably quite comfortable sitting where he is. We've got elections coming up November 4th, and there's some interesting contests for different reasons that I'll be following, and I think a lot of poll watchers this side of the pond and your side will interpret whether Trump is a positive or a negative factor in the electoral success of Republicans and Democrats going forwards.
Yeah, we'll come on to those elections in a moment, Martin. Quite a change in attitude from President Trump, if you're saying he's not really interested in the polls, because Trump 1.0, if I can put it that way, he was very agitated, wasn't he? Whenever there was a drop in his poll ratings, there was a reaction, there was a shift in terms of his style, in terms of policy. He was even a very close watcher of the markets and what they were doing. And that's why tariffs, for example, never really took hold in terms of Trump during his first presidency. But this time around, you're saying, and I think this is evidenced by the lack of reaction to these poll numbers in a sense. Do you think that then leans away from this suggestion that was doing the rounds a couple of months ago, seems to have quietened down a little, that he was considering running for a third term, which of course is unconstitutional, but there were all sorts of rumours that they were trying to find ways around that constitution?
Nothing's off the table when it comes to Donald Trump. You know, look, it's a heck of an ask for an 83-year-old man to try and have an unconstitutional third term. That I'll wait and see. There are circumstances that it can happen. There are reasons for elections to be delayed or for presidents to be offered the extension, and I'm sure they're investigating those possibilities. I think there's more chance of Donald Trump Jr. getting the nod, and there being a kind of Trump dynasty created where Trump's just passed the baton to other Trumps, which is great because, of course, we've just this weekend had the No King's Day protests across the whole nation, which is a phenomenal turnout for them, and that must have been registered. So yeah, the idea of creating your own monarchy is interesting. Well, we've had that in the past. We've had the Bushes and the Kennedys in the past have created these dynasties. So we'll see whether Trump has one. I think the difference with the first term is Trump is now surrounded by his own people. In the first term, he had to borrow heavily from the traditional Republican Party to get his secretaries of state and senior advisors. He didn't have the machinery. This time he's surrounded by his own people, and he'll feel a lot more comfortable and less exposed because he's got his own people around him. And I think his polls that he does pay attention to are headlines. And at the moment, you've got what appears to be a very subservient mainstream media, and we can explore that in a moment. And also the stock market. Now, the stock market isn't the economy, anybody will tell you, but it is doing remarkably well, robustly well. We're at record levels on all the main indices. Everybody's pension plans are worth more than they were last year. And if you bought Nvidia 3 years ago, you're looking at Ferraris. So there's lots of positivity. Now, everyone's expecting a huge crash and crumble at some time in the future, but at the moment, this Roman orgy of excesses is still continuing, and everybody feels pretty comfortable about it. The media aren't holding much sway on anything at the moment, so he's getting a lot of leeway. I think knocking down half the White House would have probably caused a little more uproar if the Obamas had done it, but at the moment they're not. And the reason for that is business. We're going to have a kind of shrinking of the economy. Let's not call it a crash, a shrinking of the economy, and that brings around mergers and acquisition opportunities, and Disney will buy somebody and ABC will sell something and ESPN will be owned by new owners, and there'll be consolidation in the media world. And all that requires political approval. So nobody who owns the 4 big media outlets is going to want to piss the administration off, because it's going to stymie them when it comes to business deals. So there's this kind of softly approach to journalism at the moment, which isn't good. And then you layer over that social media, which is polarized completely, and you can read the same story in 2 different lenses, and the remarkably different versions of the truth. So I think Trump's comfortable. He's got his people around him. His MAGA base is loyal still. And I don't think that he's particularly moved or swayed until the campaign finances start drying up, and he hasn't got the money to gild the 90,000 square foot ballroom he's about to build. So,
yeah, let's just dig into 1 or 2 of those things you've said, Martin. The No Kings marches that took place. Apparently, over 7 million people participated in those demonstrations, or very peaceful demonstrations, it has to be said. Can I just ask you what the general feeling of America is? Because if you're looking at this from the outside in, and obviously we're getting the political news of Trump's doing this, he's got ICE officials out, he's putting troops on the streets, all that sort of thing, you would almost come to the conclusion that in America right now, people are hunkering down, staying at home behind closed doors and just hoping that the next 4 years fly by quickly and we can get somebody else into the White House. What's it like on a day-to-day basis there?
Again, depends where you live. So there were 7 million people who took to the streets for No King's Day, but there was probably about 700 million people cheering them on at home. Some of whom are too scared to leave their properties because they're worried about masked ICE agents snatching them off the street, which all sounds very, Weimar kind of era Europe. But there's also just a lot of people who don't want to get involved, don't want to be engaged in politics. It's not a passion the same way as it is in the UK. People are Republican or Democrat in the 3rd or 4th listing of how they define themselves. Their sports teams come first, their religion comes first, their geographic location comes first. There's a lot of other things that are more important about defining people than political parties in the US. Trump is a strange fish. A lot of what he does is very, very popular across the board. I think the idea of being active and doing things, even if some of the things he does are a little off kilt, appeals to people because they've felt that they've been left out or ignored for so long, and politics as normal has just rolled on and on. And here's someone who definitely does things differently and says what he thinks and all the rest of it. So I think there's a popularity for that. I think where people are starting to get a little more concerned is when constitutional issues are challenged, or some of the authoritarian elements are starting to come forward. So deploying the National Guard onto the streets of Chicago was an unusual move in any book. It was a warning shot because the chap who's the governor of Illinois is my favourite to be the presidential candidate for the Dems next time round. Very robust, billionaire of his own right. He's the heir to the Hyatt hotel chain. 60-odd-year-old guy, massive, big, big for even on American standards, big. But there's a warning shot there from the administration to try and challenge some of that. Same with Governor Newsom out in California. I don't think he's electable at a national or federal level. I don't think Americans want to be California. I think there's a difference there. But he's very vocal and is leading the charge. And it'll be interesting to see. We mentioned earlier about these elections that are coming up. It'd be interesting to see some of what we learn from what happens in those over the coming weeks.
You mentioned the media being cowed, partly because of these mergers, acquisitions, business interests in a sense, and the governments have to rubber stamp those deals. And so in that regard, you can perhaps understand, if not necessarily sympathise, with the tactic of saying, OK, let's leave this guy to do what he needs to do, because we've got to get these big deals across the line. And in the end, it's bottom line that matters to these people more than anything else. But isn't there also an issue in terms of White House passes now? So people who are given access, journalists, to what we would describe as a press conference. And I understand that podcasters now who are friendly to Trump are getting these passes over what we will call investigative mainstream journalists.
In part, that reflects where media has evolved to, but it's also definitely got a political play to it as well. I mean, you saw the whole press corps walk out of a Department of Defense press conference en masse and take their boxes out of the press lobby because they wouldn't succumb to the request to have their news stories edited before they went out. So there's a little bit of pushback at the journalist level, but that's obviously different than when it gets to editorial and when it gets to commercial. I think the inclusion of podcasters and influencers is interesting, because there is no doubt that there are various, in all walks of life, there are media celebrities who are online and not controlled or restricted by the formal, the fifth estate, the media empires. And the same is true in the UK. You've got Gary Neville's podcasts, you've got Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart's politics podcast. You've got those kind of things that are huge followerships, much higher than people who watch Match of the Day or read the back page of the Mirror Sport or whatever, So you have got a shift in those kinds. But what that brings with it is a much more partisan points of view, and partisan points of view that are built around clicks. So everything needs to be a controversy. Controversy sells. So that fuels further the kind of Trump ego and the Trump agenda of seeking a headline by saying something outrageous. So it's a vicious cycle, I guess. He's happy to do that. They egg him on to do it. Okay, I'll do it again, and on it goes, and on it goes. So I think people are increasingly aware that there's a polarization in media, and they're sinking into their bubbles. So the bubbles that I belong to were largely applauding the No King's Day marches and the behaviour of those involved, and the bubbles that I read but don't subscribe to were telling me that it was a left-wing takeover, rioting and looting on the streets, which of course didn't happen. But
interestingly, the most popular podcaster from the right, Joe Rogan, has recently started to be rather critical of the president, particularly in respect of his immigration policy and the actions that reference this earlier, Martin. ICE are taking, so masked armed guards turning up people's houses or workplaces or at school gates and just snatching people without what we would ordinarily consider due process. When somebody like Joe Rogan starts to speak out, Marjorie Taylor Greene has been critical of the shutdown, which we may talk about later as well, in respect of the healthcare cuts that are being proposed. And she's obviously saying, in my constituency, that is going to be a real problem for me. And she's been, as I say, very, very critical. Big MAGA fan, big Trump fan, for those who don't know. Marjorie Taylor Greene famously, of course, told Emily Maitlis to fuck off when she asked her a difficult question one time. So will that begin to concern not necessarily Donald Trump, but those Republicans like J.D. Vance and others who hope that it won't be a dynasty of Trumps into the White House, but maybe they could be the Republican candidate in 3 years' time?
And that's exactly what it's all about. Politics is business and business is politics, and they're both forward-looking. So it doesn't matter what happened yesterday, it's what's going to happen tomorrow. So they are assuming that there will be a term limit and that the current incumbent will not be allowed to stand again. And therefore, the scrap is on for who's going to be in the ascendancy for that. Audrey Taylor-Greene has got enough support in the MAGA community to be a possible. Joe Rogan is listened to not exclusively, but largely by MAGA supporters. And they are, if not going to be the candidates or the decision makers themselves, they're going to start shaping this debate. And I think there's also the big beast of the Republican Party out there as well, which still a little dormant at the moment, but is more than capable of raising vast sums of money and shaping elections as it wants to. So I think everyone's starting to move their feet a little bit about thinking what happens next. These elections that I referenced earlier are going to be telling. So what you've got is midterm elections, but they don't happen till next year. So that's the halfway point, and that's when the House, the composition of Congress is decided. But what we've gotten this year is we've got two gubernatorial elections here in New Jersey and in Virginia, both swing states. So we're watching those with an interest to see how does the Republican candidate perform and how does the Democrat candidate perform. Neither of whom are incumbents; they're replacements. So that's going to be interesting, and we'll extrapolate from that whether Trump has been an asset or a hindrance to the Republicans, and whether his behaviours have been motivating and mobilizing for the Democrats, and we'll see. It's interesting that in Virginia, the two female candidates. So Virginia will elect its first female governor, which is great. And if the Republicans win, it'll be the first black female governor anywhere in the nation. So that's, I don't want her to win for my political allegiances, but that would be progress of sorts as well. So Trump has backed her in that race and has been less warm about backing the candidate in New Jersey. There's been some spats in the past. So we're looking at those. There's also the New York morality up for grabs as well.
And this has caused an awful lot of interest in the UK as well, because you've got this young Mandami, is that right, his name? Well, I think we probably describe him as a centrist firebrand, but of course he's way to the left in terms of American politics.
He's like North Korean. But
offering bloody free bus passes. God forbid.
I know, I again follow too much politics perhaps, but tuned into a streamed press conference of his the other day, listening to hear what he's going to talk about, and he spoke about changing the procurement rules around education so that there was a streamlining of purchasing and less reactive and more planned purchasing. And you're like, wow! I mean, that's what gets people excited in Brooklyn. But I mean, look, he is if elected governor will be the first Muslim mayor, rather. He'll be the first Muslim mayor in New York, and also the first millennial mayor anywhere. So a change in generation. So you look at the US, and you think, oh, it's all, staid old white men doing things, and it's not. There's a lot of diversity and a lot of interest and differentiation going on. Well, again, that's the election that I'm following. A lot of money has gone into the Democrat campaign. The opponents in that one are interesting as well. So the Republicans chose a guy called Curtis Spieler, who you may remember as being the founder of the Guardian Angels. Do you remember that gang that wore the red berets and rode on the subway trains to keep you safe in the 70s? Yeah. He's their candidate, but Trump's not endorsed him. He's kept well away. And there's a huge call for him to step down because the other candidate in the race is Andrew Cuomo, and Andrew Cuomo comes from a Democrat dynasty. The Cuomos. His father was the governor of the state recently, and he is perhaps the orthodox candidate. So there's a big cry from the Republicans to stand their guy down and hope that the Republican vote switches over to get behind Cuomo as an independent in order to stop this outlier on the Democrat side. So it's going to be interesting to see whether any of that happens and where the vote does move around to. But I think that all the indications are that the Democrat Mandami will win and become the mayor of New York City. And then it will be great to see where big donors are behind him for the city. You saw some of the hedge fund managers saying that they will work with the mayor to help his economic program. Wall Street is, I wouldn't say behind him, but willing to embrace him and work with him. So it's going to be a very interesting scenario, because what it will point to is what will the Democrats think is an electoral success going forwards. So New York is the largest metropolitan area. It will be a signpost to what other big cities may be thinking of in terms of their candidates for next year, and also the platforms they stand on. And then ultimately, does that translate at a federal level for senators, for House representatives, and ultimately the presidential prize in 28? So it's going to be a very telling election.
Yeah, Dan, we'll keep obviously a keen eye on those 4th of November polls. Let me just ask you about the 26 midterms, though, Martin, because again, there are people who are expressing genuine concern that those elections are not necessarily going to be free and fair. So you've talked about what's going on in terms of potential, what we would call in this country, boundary changes. Or gerrymandering, as others may suggest. Just talk us through what's happening there and why Democrats appear to be somewhat concerned.
Oh, yes. Boundary. So as you and I, Frank, who've got a history of working in local government, understand, but boundary changes can cause all kinds of challenges and problems. Most recently, for the UK general election, they changed the boundaries of some constituencies, and it meant some MPs disappeared and some constituencies disappeared and new ones were created. So it does happen all the time, and it's largely to try and it's built around the census. It's built to make sure that voting districts are of comparable sizes. Texas, at the urging of the president, decided to just change its electoral boundaries to create more safe Republican seats. So if you imagine where you live and they draw a red line, and it misses out the estate but captures more of the suburban greenbelt, then you can imagine how the electoral boundaries change. And that's what they did. And the purpose of that is that come the elections, it gives the Republicans a better chance of having a majority. There is no rule or law in Texas that makes that illegal. It just hasn't ever entered the statute book. So smartly, they took advantage of that. In California, Governor Newsom has suggested doing the same on a temporary basis for this one round of elections to counterbalance that. Is saying the motivation for it is to restore democracy, because Texas, another big state, has fiddled the books, and we're going to counterbalance that. The challenge for California is that they have a law that suggests that that can only be done by an independently elected commission. And it's called Proposition 50. That's the vote. That's the vote that's going to be asked of California's voters on the 4th. Do they agree to suspend that for 1 year or one term and allow the governor to redraw the constitutional boundaries for the election? It's a big ask. I mean, there's a lot of people who, even if they understand the motivation, aren't comfortable with, granting that to it. Interestingly, at the weekend, a series of TV adverts ran in California featuring Barack Obama, imploring people to support this initiative, pointing straight down camera and saying the future of democracy is at risk. California, the nation needs you, which was a very bold and aggressive campaign statement. So to have got Obama drafted in, ups the ante again, lots and lots of money going into those campaigns, a lot of money going into the Vote No campaign. Obviously, people who support political parties in California more comfortable with the regime as it is. What they call the Central Valley, the middle of the nation, is very, very much Republican territory. The Ronald Reagans, the Schwarzeneggers, that's where their power base used to come from. People think of LA and San Francisco when they think of California, but it's a big place, and there's a lot of it. So we'll see what happens there. In Virginia, the governor the sitting administration has requested federal invigilators to come into some of the key counties because they fear the votes won't be counted fairly. So you're getting to the point where, remember when we used to get asked to go and fly out to the Eastern Europe and invigilate counts there? Yeah. You're getting almost to that point that you might see former Soviet states being asked to come in and count the votes on behalf of America, which is all a bit strange. So there's a lot of fear that these might not be the most honest and straightforward elections, and that nobody, whether you're left or right, wants to be in that situation where you can't trust the electorate process.
Yeah, no, and it's incredible, as you say, Martin, that we're even having that conversation about the United States and its elections. And the final point on this before we go to a short break is that people are suggesting that one of the reasons Trump is moving these state troopers and ICE big time into blue states, which is Democrat states, is that when it does come round to election time, there'll be such intimidation that natural Democratic voters will be reluctant to go to the polls. And that's just seen as an additional move to suppress the Democrats' vote. Now, do you think that's real, or do you think that Trump is actually genuinely concerned about the state of those places, and he thinks that troops, stormtroopers and so on are required? Doesn't seem to me, when you see the pictures from those places, that they're in a particularly bad state of affairs, but you tell me.
I could write a book on that. It's amazingly complicated. So first of all, Trump's pretty vindictive, and in order to go after his what he sees as opponents, he's mobilizing his executive orders and what's at his disposal. So it's no surprise that he's sent them to Chicago. No surprise he sent them to LA, right? Because he's causing trouble in both Governor Piskin and Governor Newsom's backyards. There's also the point that fear is a really powerful political tool. So just by virtue of having told the nation that Chicago is in such a terrible state, he had to send the troops in, reinforces possibly what a lot of his MAGA base believe to be true, that lawlessness is overrunning the nation. The reports about the UK that make it through here suggest the same. You can't wear your watch on the streets of London. You get your phone snatched. you can't buy a Greg's pastry because they're free. You just walk in and take them. But we've had all those pictures, and everybody believes it. Everybody speaks to us. Oh gosh, terrible place London's become. Really? Okay. But fear is powerful. Fear is very powerful. So doing it might not make a jot of difference politically and electorally in Chicago or LA, where he's not going to win the vote anyway. But it's for people in Mississippi and people in Virginia and people in Arizona and Nevada, it may be a really powerful message. So he's up to doing that as well. And I think that ICE's actions are now getting out of control. Back to the Joe Rogan thing. He spoke out against it, because even people who have concerns and fears about lawlessness or undocumented migration are starting to realize that it's not a very well put together plan. Speak to any farmer. Here in Florida, we've just had to lose our tomato crop this year. We didn't have the people to pick the tomatoes this year, so they just plowed them back into the ground. Now, sounds like a trivial little anecdote, but that's cost tens of billions of dollars to agriculture. We haven't got the workers to pick the soybeans that we want to export to China before the tariffs came into play. So there's lots of moving parts in all this. But I think Trump's motivations are largely to score points against his political rivals, and he's carefully chosen areas to do it that aren't going to probably impact him electorally, but give him a great message politically.
Okay, interesting. Right, Martin, well, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, I want to talk about Jeffrey Epstein and the shutdown. And no, me neither, thankfully. And then we're going to get into foreign affairs as well, which perhaps is an area where Donald Trump, at least more recently, has enjoyed one or two successes. So stay with us. We'll be back in a minute. So welcome back to the second part of this special Downtown Den Politics podcast episode. Delighted to be joined by Martin Liptrot, our man in the States. And we've talked largely about Donald Trump's actions around such things as ICE and taking on the media and all those things that would absolutely abhor liberals such as me, Jim Hancock and Joe Phillips. But let's move on to an issue that I no doubt is exercising Americans far more than those matters, and that is the shutdown of government, because I sort of remember this happening under the Clinton administration. So that's a fair while ago now. And this happens, correct me if I'm wrong here, Martin, when the Republicans and Democrats fail to agree a budget which needs, I think it's 2/3 support of the House before it can go through. Maybe wrong on those stats. And we've got to this state of basically the Republicans saying, well, if the Democrats won't give, then the government will have to stay closed down. In the past, again, I think it's fair to say, certainly under that Clinton shutdown, the people who ended up getting the blame were the politicians and not the president. So how is this one playing out?
Right. So what the shutdown means is that the government's federal bank accounts are locked, and it can't pay or spend money on things that it traditionally does. And then there's a whole range of services and activities that have to be protected anyway. So the Department of Defense announced earlier this week that soldiers will be paid, and they're going to use the R&D budget to transfer over. So why that's important is because it gives executive power. That's that phrase again, executive power to the administration to change budget lines and to move monies around. Of course, there's there's no guarantee that the money comes back once it's been changed over. So there's those of us who are perhaps a little more sceptical of politics are looking at what that means. And so has the administration. The administration has said we're now in our third week of lockdown, the Clinton one didn't actually happen. It got broken out over a weekend. The only time it's happened before is in Trump 1, when they've actually gone into this. But this is the most extended and long-term one we've ever had. And you're dead right. It's about not having an agreement in Congress to set budgets. And this one is about debt. As you know, I think I wrote a blog about it for you a week or two back. We've got about $37 trillion of debt.
Yeah.
And at some point, we're going to have to start either paying it back or not increasing it much more. So if you decide to stop spending, that might help. But that impacts things that people care about: defence, national parks, air traffic control is a federal thing. So you can close airports as a consequence of this. So it interferes with commerce, but also people getting home for holidays. So we've got a big one coming up in November, in the Thanksgiving holiday, when people traditionally travel. Hopefully be resolved before then. But yeah, the impasse is that the Republicans are blaming the Democrats and the Democrats are blaming the Republicans, and to date, neither side's willing to move. Trump has also seen an opportunity to start cutting some of the government departments he doesn't see as particularly necessary. So he tried this under Doge, if you remember that. We had that Department of Government Efficiency when Elon was popular. He's gone away now, and Doge has gone away with it. But this is another attempt to do the same thing. So if you can close down the Department of Education, is one that they want to get rid of. If you can get rid of various health and social service benefits, that's another one that they're keen to trim. Anything, in fact, that, in Trump's words, looks like a Democrat idea is at risk. So all those different divisions. So there's again, back to what I was saying about the Trump administration being comfortable in its own skin. There's a plan behind this. There's an opportunity, at least, if not a plan, to scale back. I mean, they put the woman who runs the Department of Education is the wife and the chief executive of the Worldwide Wrestling Federation. So Linda Mahar. So she's the chief of education in the nation, and she is 100% with Trump in banning books, unfunding things that they don't agree with, taking subjects they don't like off the agenda, off the curriculum. My state, Florida, where I'm based, we're top of the league for banning books. We've banned more books than anybody else. So that's which is interesting, because the little bookstore in my town celebrates that and prints the list and then makes all the books available for sale. So, but they've all been taken out of schools. But there's a real appetite. There's a real appetite to shrink government. Yeah, and I think that's probably supported broadly in the American populace.
Yeah.
And that's an opportunity that people are starting to pay attention to and take advantage of. Shutdown has got to end, because we're going to get to a point when key services that people rely on are no longer available. And for Trump, that's a nervous one, because the MAGA base is a lot of retirees and a lot of working poor. So working poor, people who have their income supplemented because they may be working in hospitality or they may be working in the service sector and not make enough money. And if they start to lose their benefits, then he starts to chip away at his core base. Back to the Joe Rogan argument that they're his listeners. So there will have to be a resolution at some point. But at the moment, both sides are digging their heels in. I don't know whether they're going to have a solution before the election on the 4th of November. So we'll see. But it's a very big risk, but it's tied to management of this debt and how America finally embraces that risk and tries to resolve it. That's what's lying behind it.
Couple of things that come from that. I mean, firstly, who is the American public blaming for the shutdown?
So if you're in the bubble I belong in, it's the Republicans and the president not putting at risk health benefits and you have to maintain health benefits. If you're in the other bubble, it's because the Democrats want to give illegal immigrants more social welfare programs, right. and this is the challenge, and both sides are right and both sides are wrong. So they're just in an impasse, and the numbers don't
polarized again. Yeah,
the numbers don't look like a change, and that's where there's a little sideshow spat going on in Arizona about a senator who's not been sworn in yet, because that might change the voting figures.
Yeah.
So
the other thing that just springs up: what sort of books are being banned?
Oh, I mean, 6. Anything that references.
6?
No. We've got 137 books, I think it stands at the moment, that are no longer allowed to be in schools. They've been taken off the reading list. So Maya Angelou has been taken off the reading list.
Right.
So books that promote ideas that the administration tends not to agree with. So Black history is awkward, right? They're not comfortable with Black history because we know what it really means, yeah, and they don't want to talk about it. So books that raise challenges about how African Americans or Indigenous peoples have been treated historically aren't favoured anymore. The Indigenous Peoples Day is also Columbus Day. If you want to recognise the split in perception, that's a way of looking at it. So it's pretty ugly. It's pretty ugly that certain books are no longer seen as being. We haven't got to the point of burning them yet. We haven't quite had that bonfire of the books. But
yeah, we're not far away. And then the other thing I just wanted to ask you about, and I suppose it relates to that last question in one sense, is if you have a president that's on 37% in the polls, is not performing well economically, it is not necessarily seen as being the most popular president at this stage of his presidency as we've seen in the past. Why aren't the Democrats taking more of an advantage, do you think, Martin, or are they starting to get their act together? I only really see Gavin Newsom. Well, listen, we're in the UK. I'm sure there's lots of other Democrats speaking as well. But Gavin Newsom, the guy Nandami that you mentioned in New York, made headlines for obvious reasons, and then AOC. Those are the 3 Democrats that I would say they're making a bit of a noise. And then, of course, Bernie Sanders, who, he's about 90-12. So are the Democratic Party still struggling from that defeat last year, or are they beginning to show some signs of life?
I will put the ball squarely in the Democrats' court. That they lost the election rather than Trump winning the election. If you could do everything wrong in an election, then this is it. They're stuck with the president that to be the candidate who'd largely been seen as not competent to do the job. They kept with him too long, and then hurriedly replaced him with somebody who was selected in a kind of political process rather than a approvals process, who never really hit the ground running, who selected a VP candidate that didn't really set anything alight in addition to that. So the Democrats made an absolute fudge of the last election, and they're still recoiling from that, I think. You're right. Newsom has definitely taken the lead in being the outspoken anti-Trump, and partly because he's been able to use modern communications methods. his TikToks, his X profile, his various social media platforms that he uses are entertaining, comical, and he does like kind of pseudo Trump-esque late night tweets, all caps kind of stuff, and it's only really reaching people like me who are poll watchers. I mean, we're all giggling along, it's like some obscure Radio 4 comedy show that we find phenomenal, but no one else has heard of. Mandami and AOC in New York are visible. Similar reason, they've found a platform. My guy up in Illinois, JD Pritzker, he's good. He did a very amusing little skit of after Trump sent the troops into Chicago, and appeared in a TikTok with a full flak jacket and hard hat on, walking down the main avenue in Chicago, and said, reporting from war-torn, which is Trump's phrase, war-torn Chicago. He said, I can confidently tell you that certain horrors have been pushed aside. Thank you to the president. We've pushed back the evils of New York style pizza, and deep dish is once again the most popular. And we've banned the habit of putting ketchup on a hot dog, which is another difference between New York and Chicago. They don't have ketchup on their hot dogs in Chicago. So he made fun of it, but he got 20 million likes on it. So it's stuff like that cuts through. Pete Buttigieg is around. He's another popular voice within the Democrat Party. But largely, I think that they haven't tackled the new breed of Democrats who may be successful in some elections coming up soon, and the orthodoxy of the party. It's still very much an Obama-Clinton party.
It needs to break free of that somehow, doesn't it? In a way that is organised, in a way that doesn't strike the American public as them just losing their marbles. Because sadly, as I say, I listen to some of the stuff Nandami's saying and think, it's just mainstream politics in the UK. But in the States, it would be seen as very radical. And I absolutely love AOC. I think, again, she's been ahead of the curve in terms of some of the stuff she's done on social media. Made a great speech at the Democrat convention last year, but not the sort of character, I don't think, who would ever be elected as president. So the Democrats have got to find a way, haven't they, of steering through that middle course, I suppose, and finding someone who will bring the party with them, but will also be able to reach into parts of America that at this moment in time they've alienated.
And that's the challenge. So America is a conservative nation, small city conservative nation. It's the UK is, frankly. But that's where the body politic sits and lies. And for reasons that are not right, but AOC is probably unelectable at a national level. Mandami just got into New York morality, so way too early for him. Pete Buttigieg and Gavin Newsom are gay men. That will not play well in certain communities here. So that's why I introduced you to JD Pritzker. The billionaire high owner who's the governor of Illinois, and has a little bit of that humour and a little bit of that humility that's required. It's going to be somebody like that. It's going to be somebody who's a staging post between the two, who's going to be able to get the youthfulness of the party engaged, but isn't going to fail to attract donors. Because AOC is not going to get broad backing from the business community or the political donations community in the numbers needed to win an election. And that's just the facts and the reality. You might not like it, but that's the reality of politics, probably around the world, but definitely here in the US. The Democrats have got to find somebody who moves the debate forwards. So it's a tough ask. It's a tough ask. There's a couple of governors out there elsewhere, other than my boy Pritzker. There's others out there who are competent as well, and probably will be at the heart of any conversation or discussion going forwards. But
these names will start to emerge. Listen, nobody had heard of Barack Obama 18 months into the Bush presidency after he eventually took over, didn't he, as the candidate, much to the chagrin of Hillary Clinton. So let's move on then to, again, something that was a big part of the MAGA campaign, which was the Epstein files. And Jeffrey Epstein was part and parcel of all sorts of speeches that were being made by Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, and they were insisting that should they take the White House, then all of these files will be released and everybody will be able to trawl through them and identify the perverts and the misogynists and the men who have been up to all sorts of distasteful things. And we should always say when we're talking about this issue that there are real victims behind these atrocious activities that took place. I think often the conversation descends into a little bit of carry-on-ism, because such was the way in which these guys operated and thought they were above the law. Absolutely appalling. There's been a book released today, I think, from the woman who has got Prince Andrew into all sorts of problems. She's sadly passed away now. And then you've got victims up in arms as well over the fact that Ghislaine Maxwell was given not a pardon as such, but certainly a downgrade in terms of her prison accommodation. So she's in an open prison now. So from going to be, from being a hawk on this issue, Trump and the administration now seem to be trying to bury this. And again, if I go back to where he's potentially going to fall out with his MAGA base, this seems to be an issue, Martin, that could come to bite him badly if he's not careful.
Yeah, it's, I mean, here's the problem with the Epstein files. Both parties have got their fingerprints all over them. Big business has got its fingerprints all over it. The media's involved and the rest of it. It could bring a lot of people down in ways that are challenging to, different interest bases. My belief, probably your belief, is that's exactly what should happen. But you can imagine that there's vested interest in that not happening. I think there was a question asked of Carolyn Leavitt, who's the press secretary, a week or so ago, about who was responsible for redacting the president's name from the files. She wouldn't answer, and stormed off stage. But that left a sour taste in a lot of people's minds, that somehow or other there's one rule for us and one rule for them. And that's the kind of thing that I don't think it's the MAGA base, but it's the Trump supporting base reacts to. So the MAGA base are, blindly allegiant. It's a cultish issue for them. But the Republican voting base, is more considered, I would hazard. And things like that don't go down well. Honestly, I don't think it's going to get resolved. I think it's going to be one of these political issues that sits in the background, like Watergate and other things. Become part of the folklore of strange behaviour in power, which is a shame, because there's a lot of victims who've been, not supported and not helped through the process. But yeah, I think it's you've obviously picked up on it because Prince Andrew, or is he still called Prince Andrew, or is he Andrew Windsor now?
He's still Prince Andrew, but he's not the Duke of York anymore.
Not the Duke.
Apparently, you can't. In fact, it's not clear whether he can just voluntarily give that title away. I think somebody was saying to me that it needs at some point to go to Parliament and be rectified, but there's only Parliament that could take away his princedom, if that's a thing. But of course, he's the son of the Queen, so he's a prince, right? So it's quite difficult to remove that title from. I think what people are pissed off about over here is the fact that he's still living in a bloody big mansion that, taxpayers have either paid for or are still paying for. But it is ironic, I think, that this big issue was made a big issue by the MAGA crowd is now being brushed under the carpet. But the two people that have really been damaged by this politically, Peter Mandelson and Prince Andrew, two Brits.
Exactly.
So yeah, but I think you're right, Martin. Vested interests, Bill Clinton's been named in these files and other people from the Democrat side as well. So you do wonder what their appetite is to have all this dirty laundry in public. And of course, what a lot of these people who feature in diaries and in files and so on will say, and again, we need to make this clear, is that, they knew Jeffrey Epstein, but they thought he was
exactly.
upstanding business guy. They were introduced by other people who they trusted, and they didn't get up to any of this stuff. And when they went to the island, they just went there to throw on the factor 15 and get a nice tan. And if you believe that,
or didn't even go to the island.
Some of them did go to the island.
I mean, Epstein's jet was used to, move Hollywood celebrities around, and I think that's back to, you think about Prince Andrew and you think about Harry and the other royals and the spares, the heirs and the spares kind of conversation. They've got these glamorous lives where they can go and do things, and I don't think they were ever held accountable. And all of a sudden, the rules changed, right? And that's not just to protect them if they're involved in things that are suggested that Prince Andrew and others were involved in. But a lot of people, Epstein was just another big business figure. And they're saying that we've got people who crashed Enron, the people who crashed Lehman Brothers, people who've crashed the banks all over the world. They were just part and parcel of the celebrity furniture, and that. So it's not excusing the behaviour at all, and the people who are involved in those heinous crimes need to be held accountable for them. I just unfortunately don't think that the process will move forward at any speed, though.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Martin, sadly. Let's come then to an area where perhaps Trump can point to some success, and that's foreign affairs, and in particular the deal that was struck for a ceasefire in the Middle East and Gaza last week. Now, there are always going to be conflicts in that part of the world, so it doesn't surprise me, I'm sure it doesn't surprise you to see that Israeli troops have been firing on Hamas and vice versa. But that doesn't necessarily mean that this ceasefire has been a failure. And in particular, what I will point to is the fact that finally aid is now getting into Gaza. And already we're seeing statistics suggesting that where there were sort of 40, 50, even 60% of children suffering from malnutrition, 30% of those kids have now been fed and are starting to get near somewhere healthy again. So if nothing else, we can be thankful for that. But of course, President Trump, and I think with some justification, has said, well, I got this deal over the line because without me, Netanyahu just wasn't listening.
You have to understand the psyche of President Trump a little bit here. He does a lot of things that are really smart and really useful and good. But there's a quid pro quo, and that is you have to celebrate him and you have to champion him. And that's not as Brits, we're not comfortable with that. But that's the culture now here, right? That's what you have to do. So if it means he gets a Nobel Peace Prize for brokering a peace treaty in the Middle East, that might be a price worth paying. Others will decide that. The Prime Minister of Norway have a big say on it, I'm sure. But that's the kind of thinking that you've got to go to. Well, I think what's admirable is admirable the right word? No. I think what's been beneficial is that Trump has acknowledged the economic might and power that America can bring to these kind of situations as well. So you might not think that building a golf course in Gaza is the right thing to do. I'm a bit skeptical about that as well. But to be having conversations about what the two-state solution looks like in practice once these nations are born, and using threats, thinly veiled and quite oblique ones, that things must happen or funding will be withdrawn, is the use of the tools at his disposal, right? So, and unlike others who've gone before, he's willing to use those, yeah. And I think the American public appreciate that, that we are the largest nation on earth, the largest economy, the largest military, or most powerful military, not the largest. Those are tools. And if we can broker peace in the Middle East and broker peace between between Russia and Ukraine, then you use those tools accordingly. Yes, you've got to celebrate and applaud Trump and give him a medal and all the rest of it. But perhaps that's a price worth paying. I fear that the issue will not resolve itself whilst Hamas is the authority in Gaza. If you look at the West Bank and the Palestinian authorities there's a different, more workable relationship. Hamas has got a military wing to it in the same way that, in a way that others don't, and that's a challenge. So you've kind of got the politicians brokering peace, but then you've got generals in warring factions. So.
Yeah. Oh, that 20-point plan, there's still a hell of a long way to go. And we know the complexities around that area of the world, and they've been in conflict forever. But I do think that sometimes, despite the fact that there are many, many things that Donald Trump does that, we find extremely distasteful, you do have to say, well, on that one, he's done an okay job, and let's hope the peace does hold, at least for as long as it takes to get some semblance of normality back there. I was listening to one of his aides who was in Gaza over the weekend saying that the place looks as though a nuclear bomb has hit it. And I think they were surprised, and again, I think the more American officials who can see the devastation of what's happened there, the better, because I do think that even Donald Trump has a human element to him that will be absolutely appalled by that. And good luck to him if he thinks he's getting a resort built in that part of the world anytime soon. He's got a much better chance with his ballroom, that's for sure, Martin. So let's draw this conversation to a close then. I was joking to you off air saying that we could have kept you here all day because there's so many things happened in this first sort of 12 months or so of the Trump presidency. Comedians have been taken off air and then put back on. We've had stuff happening in terms of racial remarks that have been happening with WhatsApp groups and some of the things that are happening with Republican advisors and all sorts. As I say, we could go on and on and on. But the big fear that people, and I just want to get your sense of how real this is that the guardrails are starting to be eroded, whether that be the media, whether that be the courts. And as you say, he's surrounded himself with people this time around who have found ways of finding the loopholes, getting round what we would have all ordinarily thought were constitutional barriers. So do you think that by the time we get to the 2028 election, we will be in a place where America is still, as we will consider, to be a democracy?
Yes, I mean, I don't think we're going to be, going into the authoritarian hellscape that people are painting. I think we're going to lose some of the freedoms that we've taken for granted along the way, and they won't be. We won't lose the right to protest, but the manner in which it's done will be scrutinised more, and I think that's the biggest risk that we face. I mean, democracies require, whether they're parliamentary democracies or elective representation or whatever, they require the ability to say no and to change course. I don't think we're going to lose that right. So I don't think a third term constitutional redraft is likely. And if there is, I think there would be significant uprising if it happened. So I think we're going to persevere. I think what you've seen is that the administration has definitely diminished the legislator. The Congress is less important than it ever was. This mess around the government shutdown will probably get laid at Congress's door, and recommendations as the administration takes control for budget setting will come forward, and they probably will. So they're the kind of little freedoms, they're the kind of little moments of contest that might start to disappear. And we've got to be careful that I think you called them guardrails, that we don't take them all away everywhere. But they are going to change, because people aren't fans of the status quo. They don't like the way that the American, system has not worked for them so far, since in these last 20 years or something. So they are looking for change, and they are looking for things to be done differently. But I don't think we're going to have a meltdown. Trump isn't able. I mean, I'd be surprised if he gets on a ticket for 2028. He'll be 84 years of age or something like that, and he's already in very poor health at the moment. So I mean, he'll do well to get through this term, perhaps. I think there's the bun fight, whether it's JD Vance or Donald Trump Jr. or whoever else as the successor, and the grooming of that person is probably what's going to happen most. But on a positive note, America is still recognizing its role as a world power, despite all that kind of retreat inside its own borders. It still has the ability to make good things happen. Its businesses are the most creative and the most innovative of all in the world. Its stock market is making people millionaires by the hour. There's a lot of good things going on here. I don't think anybody wants to risk those things for the sake of political change. So I'm hoping that we can strike a better balance between all those issues going forwards.
Good to hear, Martin. Glad I've been able to end on a positive note and not send our listeners away slashing their wrists thinking that America was sinking into Nazism and fascism. No, honestly, a huge thank you for taking time out to share your thoughts and opinions and insights into what's happening in the States at the moment. We do fortunately get a regular update from Martin in our TFI bulletin. So if you've not subscribed, that is free. Then please do so. Go to the Downtown in Business website and you can subscribe to that. And as I say, Martin is one of our regular bloggers, and you can keep up to date with what's happening in the States. We may get you on before Christmas, Martin, to perhaps reflect on those results that are due on the 4th of November elections. That'd be useful. So good to see you, mate, and back to Blighty in the new year or Christmas.
Hopefully, yes. I was lucky enough to go to your event at the Hill Dickinson Stadium couple of weeks ago, so hopefully I'll go back and I'll be able to see a ball kicked around there at some stage. So yeah,
we'll definitely get you to a match, that's for sure, mate, next time you're back in town. So no, great to see you, Martin, and thanks for listening, everyone. We'll be back with our usual episode on Monday, when I think Jim Hancock is likely to be absent because he's using that triple lot pension to have another holiday, but Joe Phillips and I will be manning the fort, so we will see you then. And thanks to Francesca for her excellent production skills as ever. And I think the book burning and any praise that we've given Donald Trump, she's found most distasteful today. So thanks for sticking with us, Francesca. See you all again soon.